Goedemiddag mensen. Leuk dat jullie er in zulke grote getalen zijn voor de afsluiting van het Stadmakerscongres. Mag ik even handen zien? Wie is er vandaag op tour geweest? Wie heeft er vandaag ontzettend veel zitten lullen hier binnen? Wie is er blijmoediger, constructiever gestemd dan toen hij vanochtend binnenkwam? Wie is de moed absoluut in de schoenen gezonken? Een paar mensen achteraf die nog de rest staat aan de bar hun verdriet weg te drinken. Goed, heerlijk dat u er bent. Fijn en een eer ook voor dit laatste programma. En I'll switch to English because at the end of each City Makers Summit, it's a tradition that we have the Guest Urban Critic here at Stadmakerscongres. For the 13th time, Aaron van der Leeuwkring invited international guests to the stage to open up new perspectives on urban challenges and opportunities for the city. The city in general, but the city of Rotterdam to be specific. And today it is my honor to introduce to you the director of the National Park City London, the world's first national park city. National Park City London began as a movement in 2013, driven by one simple idea. What if you reimagined our urban lifestyles by applying the principles of the mission of national parks to a city? This resulted in London becoming the world's first national park city, supported by the Mayor of London and backed by over 250 partner organizations, and in that way representing a unique long-term grassroots movement for everyone who wants to make London greener, wilder and healthier. At least that is what they claim. But how does it work? And what if the city of Rotterdam wants to pursue such an ambition as well? It's an honor to ask to the stage. He is the advisor for DemocracyNext, but here as a director for National Park City of London. And this year's Guest Urban Critic, please welcome to the stage, Mark Cridge.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be invited today. Thank you so much. This is my second visit to Rotterdam. I actually came here about 6 months ago. But it's not my first encounter with Rotterdam. If you go back to when I was 10 years old, 1983, and as you may have worked out, I'm not English, I'm from Scotland, I'm from Paisley in Scotland. So that will also help if you're thinking, sorry, what language is that guy speaking? Just give it a couple of minutes, it'll work out. But the 10-year-old, 1983, and my local football club, who I'm still a huge fan of, St Mirren Football Club from Paisley, were hosts to Feyenoord, who came to their stadium. And unfortunately, Feyenoord knocked St Mirren out of the UEFA Cup that year. And it was the last time, I think, Johan Cruyff played on Scottish soil. But it was also the first time that a young footballer called Ruud Gullit scored in the UEFA Cup, knocking St Mirren out of the UEFA Cup. So I'm trying to overcome that feeling that when you're 10 years old and you form really important early memories, you can maybe never forget, but I can forgive. And so it's good to be here. But as talked about, I think if I go to the first slide, or will it come up? Or do you need to press? There we go. I'll go back. There we go. I'm going to talk today primarily about London National Park City, but also the National Park City movement as a whole. And I'll also talk a little bit about this incredible new organization, DemocracyNext, who are now based in The Hague. And they are focusing on using citizens' assemblies in all different forms of decision-making to really create more opportunities for people to get involved. But National Park City is very much a mechanism, a new story for helping everyone participate in how we shape our cities. And predominantly how we shape our cities and how we think of our cities in relation to nature and people. Because the most important word in National Park City for me is not necessarily park, it's actually city. And the citizens who make that city. And so what I'm going to focus on today is less about the greening projects and the infrastructure and so on. I'm primarily going to talk about the people who make up National Park City and the role that they play. You really need to press this, by the way. So, just to start with a bit of context setting, a wonderful quote by anthropologist Gregory Bateson. He talked about the major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way that people think. And really, you can use that as a guide, the way we extract and use resources at a huge rate, the way we mismanage our watersheds, the way we produce our food. The relationship we have with nature is really broken because we're stuck in the wrong story. We're stuck in a story that sees us as consumers who draw in and can use as much as we want. But of course, I think anyone who's concerned about the climate and the biodiversity crisis will recognize that maybe this story isn't working out quite the way we need it to. And so 10 years ago, some incredible group of people got together, led by a wonderful visionary called Dan Raven-Ellison. And he came up with the national park city concept. And it really started from that really simple question, what if? What if we took the idea of national parks and applied them to cities and urban areas? How might we think differently about cities and think differently about what it means to live in cities? And that's an incredibly important set of questions to ask because so many people are now moving to cities. So much of the world population lives in cities. It's a really urgent task to think, are we stuck in the right story? Maybe we need to tell a different story, and what might that story be? So the concept of national parks, I think you're all generally familiar, but in the UK, we have many wonderful national parks. The Peak District here, mountains, rolling hills in sort of the heartland of England. The South Downs, right on the south coast, with the White Cliffs. This is Seven Sisters in South Downs National Park. The Lake District, inspiration for poets and storytelling and all sorts of sort of wonderful connection with nature. Pristine natural environments, Dartmoor, this incredible sort of hostile, forbidding place, which is kind of the start of so many kind of tales and stories and so on. And then this is Banau Brycheiniog. So I need to, it was formerly Brecon Beacons, I need to move from David Tennant to Martin Sheen and go for the Welsh, Banau Brycheiniog, which is some of the most beautiful stark wilderness in Wales. And then, London. Wait a minute, how is this going to work? So obviously this is a fairly typical view of London, because if you think of London, you don't think of pristine wilderness, you don't think of ecosystem, you don't think of nature. But in fact, London is an incredibly wild and diverse ecosystem in and of its own right. And up until now, up until the concept of national park cities, really the only type of ecosystems that didn't have any kind of national park status were urban ecosystems. So forests and wetlands, tundra, deserts, hundreds of fantastic examples of sort of protected areas all around the world. But up until now, cities didn't have that same status because even though we might see cities as grey and built up in sort of heavily urbanized environments, they're often home to a huge diversity of nature in and of its own right. And we would argue that nature is just as valuable, urban nature is just as valuable as any nature you would find in a more wilderness environment. So I think we have lots of fox. I can't remember where I saw this wonderful fox statue yesterday when I was touring around Rotterdam. But the urban foxes are just as valuable as Arctic foxes or something more picturesque and so on. There's no reason that we should decide that a peregrine falcon using a sort of cliff side of a building is any less important than the sort of golden eagle you might find out in the Cairngorms National Park in Scotland. And so that led us to sort of thinking differently about the city, how do we see the city differently using that national park city thinking? And this was one of the first things that the campaign did, was working with Urban Good. They created this urban nature map of London. And very simply, it took a traditional Ordnance Survey style map. It's knocked back all the streets and buildings and brought forward all the green and blue spaces. And it's just a very quick, instant visual way of starting to see the city differently. Because in fact, London has 8.4 million trees, along with 8.7 million human inhabitants, 15,000 species other than humans. You have 4,500 parks, 850 kilometer streams and rivers. London is almost almost half green and blue space, 49.7 green and blue space when you take into account all the parks and gardens, allotments, rivers, all the open areas and so on. So why shouldn't we think of cities as diverse ecosystems that can be celebrated with a form of protected status? Why shouldn't we? What if we did this? How might it start us to think about seeing the city differently? So this was the map, which is available for purchase, $9.99 from all good booksellers, of course. And I think there's many other urban maps. Urban Good do an amazing job of working with different cities to produce their urban maps. I'm not actually sure if there's a Rotterdam Urban Good map yet. Maybe someone can help me with. But I'm sure there will be soon enough. But as was mentioned up front, and so in 2019, the campaign came to a culmination, if you like, when London became the world's first national park city. It brought together all these different groups, all these different actors from across the city to agree that London has what it takes to be a national park city. And over the past couple of years, we've codified that movement into a process that can be followed by other cities. And one of the key steps in becoming a national park city is to establish your national park city charter. And so the London National Park City Charter talks about we're working together for better lives, health and well-being, wildlife, trees and flowers, time outdoors, culture, art, playing, walking, cycling, locally grown foods, taking decisions and sharing together in relationships with nature. Because national parks and national park cities aren't just about nature and wilderness, about the whole place, all the activity that takes place, all the things that people and nature do together. And that's a really important consideration for Rotterdam, thinking about the people you have in Rotterdam and how you use the concept of a national park city to really create a much greater cultural participation within the city, using nature as a focus, because nature is such an incredible way to unite people from different perspectives and different backgrounds. It's a way of opening up new conversations, finding common ground that maybe you haven't been able to find through other methods. So in 2021, Adelaide in Australia became the second national park city. They often talk, in London we talk about greener, healthier and wilder. Adelaide often talks about greener, healthier and cooler, because I believe it's a little bit hotter down there. Although obviously London hitting 40 degrees last summer was maybe shook that up a little bit. But one of the key concepts is each city takes the idea of national park city and tells their own story. That makes it, you take what's special about Rotterdam, what's special about Adelaide, what's special about London, and really tell your own story and use it to kind of address the issues that are kind of important for this city. So we codified the process in the Journey book. It's available at nationalparkcity.org/journey. And it outlines the 23 criteria that we assess to determine whether a city can become a national park city. And it's really important that becoming a national park city, it's not an award. It's not saying this city is perfect. It's got everything right in regards to its relationship with people and nature. It's about a commitment in a direction of travel. It's about recognizing that there's plans in place, the movement has been built, there's enough common cause together to say we're going to really reestablish that reconnection with nature and reap all the benefits that come from that. And so the accreditation process I won't go into just now, but we have a three-way partnership between the National Park City Foundation, Salzburg Global Seminar, and World Urban Parks. And together the three organizations form the accreditation body for national park cities and assess the kind of portfolio of evidence that is submitted, and we'll do a number of site visits and so on, and then determine, yes, this city is showing what it takes to become a national park city. Which I guess takes me on to Rotterdam, which doesn't seem to have the image behind, which is a shame because it's quite a wonderful image as well. Let me see if the next one. It's a shame. Imagine, if you will, in front of the Natural History Museum, an incredible group of about 100 people shouting, cheering, just getting really super excited about Rotterdam National Park City concept. The Plant voor Plant Kameraden, I think, was one of the signs I remember, and the Rotterdam National Park sign as well. If you haven't already, I would really encourage you to visit the Natural History Museum in Rotterdam to see the permanent exhibition about National Park Rotterdam. I was lucky enough to go yesterday, and Niels took me round, and along with some of our colleagues, and it was really a small but perfect encapsulation of what could really start that sort of national park city story in Rotterdam. But there's also 5 other cities are nominated. So 2 weeks ago, we announced that Rotterdam is a nominated city to be a national park city, along with Breda, just 20 minutes away from here. Chattanooga in Tennessee, where the Chattanooga Choo-Choo used to run to. That really dates people if people haven't heard of the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. But again, Chattanooga, a post-industrial city that's looking for a new identity, a new way of imagining its relationship with nature. And in the case of Breda and Chattanooga, each of those campaigns is kind of led by the city government and using it as a way to encourage greater participation within environmental issues within the city. Whereas Rotterdam is clearly started more from a grassroots effort, the same way that London did. Adelaide was more sort of top-down and using it to kind of open up more avenues for people to participate. So each city is coming at the story from different directions. It's saying, what do we need right now? What's important for this place? And how can we use the National Park City story to involve more people? In the UK, we also have Southampton, which is right on the south coast, and importantly is also adjacent to the New Forest National Park. So one of the things we're trialling in the UK is how we can, a national park city which is close by to a traditional national park, what sort of relationship does the national park city and the national park have? Because one of the most important things National Park City can do is it can establish a nature reconnection where people are. And once you establish that nature reconnection, you're more likely to then go and visit other places or try to find deeper nature reconnection in more traditional protected and wilderness environments. And one I'm extremely proud of as well, that Glasgow should soon become a national park city as well. So Glasgow, adjacent to Loch Lomond in Trossachs National Park, and is actually, Glasgow's known as being a deer green place, which is one of the mottos or one of the ways to describe Glasgow. So again, a city which is very much post-industrial, looking for a new identity. I'm sure Rotterdam can see a lot of itself within Glasgow, similar size, similar reliance on port industries and heavy industry and so on. You're having undergone a lot of change in demographics and so on. So it's kind of, it's having the National Park City story as a way of opening up new forms of participation. So then we come on to the next stage of what I talk about, which is the root of the crisis we find ourselves in. You're obviously familiar with the climate stripes, which go back, in this case, they're not quite the same. This one, the climate stripes at the top go back to 1850 up to present day. And down the bottom, you'll have heard of the climate crisis. You may not be aware of the biodiversity crisis. But these two interlinked crises are really coming to a head now. So the one at the bottom goes back to 1970, just before I was born. And over that time, we've lost 70%, 69% of biodiversity has been lost in the world on average. 69%, 2/3 of the world's biodiversity has been lost in the last 50 years. And the implications that has for us as humanity and society and our relationship with nature is really stark. And so these two interlinked crises, they're really, Ella Saltmarsh, who's this incredible thinker, works for the Long Time Project, she talks about how we're living the symptoms of living the wrong foundational stories. The stories we tell ourselves about what's important and how we organize society have really led to these dual crises. And so finding ways out of these crises is clearly a pretty urgent task, last time I noticed. So even if you're maybe not so worried about it, you're certainly aware of it. And if you're aware of it, you may know what role you can play, but you might just not really be too sure what to do. So if national park cities can be a way of introducing a new story to connect you with people who do have some of those ideas and are sort of looking for answers, but looking for answers together, then that's one of the most powerful things we can do, is to tell ourselves new stories about how we might live in the future. And because so many of us are going to live in cities, telling new stories about cities is really the work. And when I talk about the work, I'm talking about everything each of us will choose to do over the next couple of decades. Because each of us has to play a role, regardless of where we are, regardless of where we work or what we do. Each of us has to think, what am I going to do? What contribution can I make? Or what can I stop doing that might make other things easier in the long run? As I mentioned a couple of times, 6 to 8% of the world's population is going to live in urban areas by 2050, according to the UN. And some commentators think it's going to be even higher than that. So not only do we have an increase in population globally, we have a higher percentage of that population living in cities. So whilst the concept of national park cities is really welcome in places like London and Rotterdam and so on, I'm really interested to see those really fast-growing, heavily urbanizing cities in South America and Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia and so on, because they're moving at such a pace, and the disconnection with nature is so absolute in some cases that if we don't take action now, we all know, and many of you in the room will know who are work in the built environment, will know that decisions taken now have decades of repercussions. So this is the moment, the time now is when we need to be making the right decisions about our relationship with nature in relation to the built environment. Lost another photo, sorry about that. But I was at the COP15 summit. So again, you've heard about the COP summits for climate. There's also a parallel set of processes for the biodiversity. And so COP15, one of the major targets, I think it was 20 odd targets come up with, one of them was particularly about urban nature. And it was really a wonderful call to action. And when I read this target and I was speaking about it in Montreal, I saw national park cities in this target as the chance to significantly increase the area and quality and connectivity of access to and benefits from green and blue spaces in urban and densely populated areas. Because it's not just about spending time in nature, it's about access to high quality green space close to where you are. And especially in London, even though I presented a very rosy picture of how green and blue and diverse London was, there's a huge inequality in access to high-quality green space. And it maps very clearly onto indices of multiple deprivation as well. So the poorest in society often have the least access to good quality green space. So national park cities are ways of helping that to improve that equality of access to green space, making sure everyone can think, how can I bring more greenery, more participation into my area, my neighborhood, my street, my community? So it's as much about opening up all those avenues for everyone within a city to participate. It's going crazy now. I don't know how to reconnect with nature. Never work with PowerPoint is my advice. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about reconnecting with nature, because it's not, I mentioned already, it's not about spending time in nature. It's the quality of that time. It's the real deep connection with nature. And one of the real experts on this is Miles Richardson in the University of Derby, who's done some really fantastic research. And he talks about how we think about, feel about, and experience nature is really the key. It's not about minutes in nature. It's about the quality of the time. It's about how much you notice nature, how much you really connect to what's going on around. Because when you really pay attention and you really get deeper in to understanding that actually we're surrounded by nature, we're part of nature, that's an essential, a real precursor to taking action against the climate and biodiversity crisis. If you haven't really reestablished that connection with nature, it's very difficult for most people to think, well, why is this important, And actually, I don't have the slide here, but I was thinking I should have included it. Miles Richardson talks about, marks out this really significant drop-off in connection with nature when you move from about 10 or 12 years old. So when you hit teenage years, you really lose that connection with nature. And in too many cases, we don't regain that connection with nature. So being able to, how you involve schools and young people within this, the thing that gives me hope is I've seen many of the sort of young climate and environment activists really get this stuff and are really sort of taking action themselves. But it is a cliche, but getting people young is really critically important. So as Rotterdam is thinking about how it might interpret the National Park City story, thinking about the role of schools and educators and young people themselves really involved. I think I was talking to, I've got to give a shout out for Marilyn and Raymond, who are on the National Park City campaign team here in Rotterdam. They've started to set up, how many, and I can't really see, but how many people went to the National Park Rotterdam discussion earlier? Okay, fair few number, so we've got some converted. Yeah, but there's, we'll get the rest of you soon, don't worry. But the concept of rangers has been really taken up here in Rotterdam. And I was talking to Marilyn yesterday about how she might, or how she's keen to open up to a Young Rangers program as well. So I think I'm really excited to see how Rotterdam is taking the story, because I think one of the beauties of this program is that in London, we're going to learn so much from how you take the ideas in Rotterdam and really run with them. But coming back to the nature connectedness, why nature connectedness is really important, and again, this is from University of Derby studies. They looked at a whole series of different reports. When you have really strong nature reconnection, it's that nature reconnection really leads to your lower anxiety, your health and well-being benefits, life satisfaction, meaning and purpose. And so it's not just about going for a walk in the park. It's really about changing your relationship with nature. And National Park City is a really wonderful way of kind of introducing those concepts. You can read about Nature Connection Handbook as well, worth a read. There's a whole series of publications. Again, if anyone wants to access any of this, it's obviously Google and you'll find it, or please feel free to contact me. But how does that nature reconnection then feed into policy and practice and so on? So I said up front, I'm an advisor to this great new group, DemocracyNext. And DemocracyNext, it was formed by incredible woman, Claudia Toilitz, who started the organization in Paris last year. And she used to head up the participatory democracy team at the OECD. And she brought her and her colleague Eva, brought together an amazing team. And they've since actually moved, they're now headquartered in The Hague, as I mentioned earlier. But they really want to popularize the idea of citizens' assemblies within decision-making. And not just in decision-making in regards to the electoral process, but decision-making in all walks of life, within institutions, within companies, within museums, within all sorts of different ways that you can involve more people within that decision-making process. And one thing, we haven't fully explored it in London, but we're extremely keen to, but I think there's maybe a fantastic opportunity here in Rotterdam as well, especially as I was talking to some folk yesterday just about, obviously there's an upcoming election here in the Netherlands. I'm not going to comment on that because I really don't know enough about the political situation here. But the turnout in Rotterdam is particularly low. And I'm sure there's many reasons for that, the nature of the demographics and new entrants into the city and so on as well. But finding ways to really connect and involve the whole of society, all citizens, all members of the city is a really urgent and important task in the years to come, because we need to build that consensus about the type of decisions that we're going to need to make as we reshape our cities. So one of the things DemocracyNext have been looking at is how we might apply citizens' assemblies in regards to new governance models around thriving and healthy cities. And DemocracyNext have been tracking, they talk about the deliberative wave. As you can really see that hundreds of deliberative processes have taken place around the world. You have big major issues like the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland in relation to abortion, or France's Citizens' Assembly and so on. Many examples in Belgium and also all across Western Europe and right around the world. But what was really interesting is how many of those, 76 out of those 600 or so, have been related to urban planning, 60 or so about the environment. That actually because the built environment is obviously a very contested area, and I've received a number of questions about this over the last couple of days, in regard to how do we strike the right balance between housing and nature and development and so on. But of course, the nature of these problems is they can't be binary issues. We can't have nature or housing. We can't have nature or development. We can't have nature or cities. We need to find ways to bring all of these together. And the only way to really do that is to involve enough people and form a consensus about the right way forward. So we develop a culture of permission that everyone understands, everyone has had their opportunity to input, but also we're able to come up with more creative solutions. And so again, I won't go too much into Democracy Next approach, but the role of participation, it gives everyone agency and dignity in the process. Sortition is a key concept that to create a citizens' assembly, you'll maybe send out, for a major citizens' assembly, you might send out 70, 75,000 invites and then whittle it down till you get a random but representative set of people. And the randomness is really important. This is representative of the general demographics and population, but it's really open to everyone. And that random selection really creates a very different way of operating. And the deliberation, the prolonged deliberation over often a number of weekends in a major citizens' assembly really channels that collective wisdom and enables people to find common ground. And if there's one thing we need in society is common ground and a common purpose and the way forward, especially around really highly contested issues. And so in relation to urban planning and so on, one of the most wonderful things, it opens up the imagination of what's possible. It creates spaces, new spaces for deliberation, and it democratizes the overall process. So it opens up new avenues and new ways to get involved. And there'll be a big report coming out from Democracy Next shortly, and there's actually going to be an open call looking for cities to participate in some of these trials, where they're looking at a three-pronged model of setting up permanent community assemblies within individual neighborhoods or communities. You're an overall city assembly for this big issues, and you're having everyone the opportunity to, if not sit on the citizens' assembly, but the more people know someone who's been on a citizens' assembly, and the more people have received those letters, it creates that halo effect where people start to feel engaged in the same way you might if you're brought in for jury service or so on as well. So it starts to percolate out through the general population. And then also finally, just when major issues do come up, the ability to have these sort of ad hoc assemblies. So this sort of three-pronged approach to using citizens' assemblies to form those consensus about highly contested issues within the built environment is going to be a really interesting model to see how that's explored. Because it's by tapping into the ideas and energy and collective wisdom of everyone, that's how we can really address these societal challenges. That's how we can realign that connection between nature and human thinking. And this is the Bible for me. This is a book by a friend of mine, John Alexander, called Citizens. And his thesis is really, we were subjects of Your Majesty. We became consumers in the 80s. And if we're really going to solve these problems, we need to become citizens. We need to, because when you think of yourself as a citizen, you're more likely to volunteer, to champion causes for your community. You're more likely to participate and be open to kind of more sort of consensual viewpoints. And so he actually uses it as a verb. How will you citizen today? How will you citizen within your community? And it's important that we're using the word citizen not as a passport holder within that society, but a member of that place. Your city, your citizens is that you're, which way round is it? The city is where the citizens are. That's kind of so anyone who's in this place, what role can they play to improve that place together? So well worth a read. So coming back to National Park City, is we've gone from what if to why not? Why shouldn't we just go and do this? Yeah, it's up to us. We can all come together, and that's the benefit of this grassroots effort, especially when it has the support of the major institutions within a place. And so one of the ways that we put this together is we have a network of rangers in London. So we already have the Rotterdam National Park Rangers. How many people have badges? Have we got a few badges there? I believe there are more badges around, but I'm sure they can be given around. But the rangers we recruit in London are people. They're the people who are already active within the community. They're the ones who are you're organising the allotment, you're doing the forest schooling, leading the walks and talks. But the key thing is it's not just about gardeners and greening, it's about art and culture and sport, the whole gamut of different things you can do outside together. And often the way we recruit these people, they're very representative. It's a very diverse group, and London's an incredibly diverse city. But also by finding these people who are often somewhat isolated in their activities and being able to connect them together and learn from each other and share their experiences, it's a way of bringing more people in and a way of getting more good ideas taken up more broadly around the city. Because London is obviously a huge place. You're 8.7 million people. And so being able to take good ideas from across the city and cross-fertilize them is one of the major tasks that I have day to day. A city of the size of Rotterdam, it's a big place, but it's manageable. You have one city government and so on. Being able to really activate a city of 600,000 people or so, I think is a really exciting prospect. So apply to be a ranger if you're in London. We have rangers from all over the place. Now I think hopefully the video is going to play. I think I'm just going to take a quick break and show a short 3-minute video just with some of our rangers talking about how they see their role and how they interpret greener, healthy and wilder.
When I think about the words greener, healthier and wilder, I think it's like a radical vision that is completely possible.
Ever since I was a child, I've always loved the environment and nature, and I think it's partly because I always grew up in big cities. I never really had access to it, so that made me want to learn about it even more. And what I really like about the National Park City movement is the fact that it's really breaking down the boundaries between what the countryside is and what nature is, and how we can incorporate those sorts of things within the urban environment.
Greener, healthier and wilder means everybody being more connected to nature and having access to nature and understanding of the nature around them.
To me, means something that has to manifest in our external world and also in our internal world. I think for me, nature connection and rewilding is as much about rewilding our own mindsets and fostering a connection to nature where we truly understand it.
People, even in cities, are part of nature, and that we are connected through these pockets of ecosystems.
To give people that real taste of countryside and everything that it offers, from the wildlife to the farm animals to the gardens to the kind of wild, untended parts. I think that's also really important, that not everything's a kind of park.
You kind of want people to also feel that they have a sense of ownership over the land that they live on, and that they can make some kind of change and a positive change.
No voice is too small. That's what I always say to people. Come out your house, get involved if you feel it's safe to get involved. Come and enjoy, because life's too short, really and truly.
The way for us to get to a greener, healthier, wilder world is to green up urban spaces everywhere and to allow people to plant, democratise gardening, democratise growing, give people the right to grow and to green their streets.
I think we get there by collaborating, by spreading the word, for people to be part of it. If we get people to be part of a community, then they themselves will take care of it and spread the word. So I think it's all about involving everybody into this idea.
I think it's about helping people actually get out into those spaces and interact with it and care about it to the point that they hopefully want to help protect it as well.
Sometimes the size of the task can look really massive, but if you involve local people, even one or two initially, and that's what it takes, just find one or two people who want to come in and help, you'll find it acts as a magnet and attracts other people in the long run.
I say get involved, always, if you can.
Amazing. I love it. I love working with the Rangers. They're such an incredible group of people. Each one of them is totally inspirational. Their own stories are kind of so special. And we'll talk a little bit about how we wanted to show some of their stories as well. So this summer, we were given 100 digital billboards across the City of London, which is a pretty significant media spend if we had to pay for it. But fortunately, JC gifted us these spaces. And then we launched the Do London Differently campaign. And we wanted to really give a platform to tell as many of these stories as we could, to just show by example, to show the different individual people. So this is Chantal, who is a forest bather, amongst many other things, but she's involved in Warren Park Nature Reserve, a campaign to protect a local nature site up in northwest London, which is at risk of redevelopment. And it's one of those areas which is a real point of tension between sporting provision for football fields and nature reserves and so on. And there's a number of other sites that could be considered, but they're really on the front line of trying to find that right balance between all the kind of athletic and sporting activity that needs to take place is so essential for development, especially in young people, but at the same time protecting the really rich biodiverse areas where we do have it. So it's a really kind of challenging task she has, but she's one of our rangers and pretty happy about it by all accounts as well. This is Ranger Katie Blake down in Newham. She runs Folkestone Road allotment, but she is an absolute joy. And she was already an incredibly accomplished individual. She'd involved in so many different projects. But by becoming a ranger, and I met her earlier this year, and becoming a ranger, it gave her a confidence to do even more. And that was really humbling. She didn't need any confidence, but the sort of the impact on individual people and how it says, yeah, we're not alone, we can do this together. There are other people who are trying to make this work. Was a really kind of fantastic story to be able to tell. This cheeky chap here, Navdeep Dayal, is now chair of London National Park City and the National Park City Foundation, an absolute inspiration. Runs the Heston Action Group in West London, where they took over, the local community took over an abandoned sporting field that was full of drug paraphernalia and really a wreck. Have turned it into a community garden. They teach local schools. They collect rainwater from roofs. They're really making it a place for the whole community. And they also now have a tree nursery. And the tree nursery then creates the trees, which are then going to be planted on the street trees around West London and so on. So it's weaving these things together, led by the community, is a kind of really important point. Mike Green, who runs the London Fungus Network, which is an offshoot campaign. He's a fungi lover. Actually, when I was putting these posters together, up until we almost sent him out, he was a fungi lover, the Italian mushroom pizza, rather than a fungi lover, which is something entirely different. But London Fungus Network, they had 190 people together for Shroom Sunday last couple of weeks ago in Nature Reserve up near Epping Forest. You're rooting through the undergrowth, trying to find new mushrooms and kind of really getting a whole range of ages and people involved, and just introducing them to the mycologically curious into the whole domain of mushrooms and so on. Paula Harvey is a forest schooler up in North London. This is Cody Dock. I think Niles, who's a huge bat fan, will like. We do bat walks down Cody Dock, which is an old industrial site in East London. River Lee runs through the Olympic Park. Cody Dock is a new nature reserve, which is really giving people a whole new perspective on this nature that exists in even the most damaged parts of our cities and so on. Ranger Elisa is an artist. This is an earth chronology microscope, which she uses to kind of zoom into lichen on trees and tell stories, and it's mixed in with audio devices. She does a huge amount of work. You're popularizing the idea of nature connection using art. This is Joe, who works up in Onveg Gardens in North London. Onveg Gardens is an incredible food-growing site that used to be basically a tip where all the different building materials used to be discarded from sites, and they've turned this into this incredible green paradise up in North London. And then this guy, who happens to be the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, but he gives out what I think the city of or the sort of the mayor of London has done with the Rewilding Fund is fantastic. We have directly investing in rewilding projects and investing in the green corridors. So many of the projects I saw in Rotterdam yesterday are kind of fantastic examples of thinking about the city and how you knit together the green spaces you already have and creating those new green corridors. So it's really exciting to see so many of these type of projects being taken up in different cities. So in the final straight now, just on the ground, some of the kind of projects that we're involved in over the next 12, 18 months or so that are really worth keeping an eye on. This was our maker paper from the 2019 launch, actually. You introduced different ways to sort of make London better. Here we go. Is it moving? There we go. Actually, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll just take a moment. I think one thing that's also really inspired me is the fact that this isn't about the city taking action, and it's not about individual action. And Cormac Russell and John McKnight in the Connected Community talk about the fact that the primary unit of change is the neighbourhood. It's a group of people coming together and saying, what can we do with this space? What if we took this thinking and looked at our neighbourhood and our community differently? And that's a really important thing to think about, that is creating that neighbourhood by neighbourhood change across a whole city is how you can change a whole place, whether it's the size of Rotterdam or whether it's the size of London or whether it's the size of Tokyo. You know, it's entirely possible to do this bit by bit, community by community, street by street. And so one of the ways we're going to be working with the Greater London Authority over the next couple of years on the local nature recovery strategy. That's where we're going to work with them on public engagement and mapping out all the opportunities for biodiversity net gain across London, borough by borough, and then matching that up with local community involvement. Because as we're thinking about how we create new green spaces, the stewardship of those spaces is really important. So being able to, again, to use those participatory methods to really involve the community in determining where the opportunities for biodiversity net gain are, but also how we protect and maintain those spaces over time as well. There's a great concept called postcode gardeners where Friends of the Earth started this a couple of years ago. We're looking to see how we can expand it, where they actually employ a gardener as an area of the city. And their primary role is to help spread knowledge and expertise to help people start to undertake food growing or new planting projects where they are. So a small amount of investment to have disproportionate impact over a large area by spreading those skills is a really important concept to think about that Rotterdam might take up. Camden Imagines is a collaboration between Camden Council and Moral Imaginations. Moral Imaginations run by an amazing woman called Phoebe Tickell who developed the concept of imagination activism. And I am an imagination activist, and you can all be imagination activists as well. It really thinks about that it's not an asset deficit, we have a deficit of imagination. So if we can imagine what's possible, we can create conditions for people to get involved. That's how we make these big changes. And so what they're doing with Camden Council, they're teaching all of the staff within Camden Council to become imagination activists. And they've started from the top down and a representative set of people through the whole authority to actually introduce that concept of greater imagination within the city government on the way, and then spreading that out through the whole community. And then one final project really is the Pocket Park Framework, and Islington Council have identified about 1,000, the pins in the middle, about 1,000 dead-end streets where we can create new pocket parks. So they're looking to create about 6 hectares of new green space just by creating new pocket parks in these dead-end streets. But the thing that's really going to unlock this is that ongoing community stewardship over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So providing the skills and experience so people can really look after these green spaces is going to be a critical element of that project's success. And then the final thing, we've just been given a free shop. We got the keys last week. So we're going to be launching our first visitor centre in the National Park City in London, where we're going to provide visitor information, exhibition, ranger training, learning education, and so on. And we're really looking to expand that as a kind of network of spaces across the city to really use the language of traditional national parks. You're having rangers and National Park City, but also when you go to a national park, you go to the visitor centre. So if you're in London anytime next year, please come and visit us. And hopefully there'll be lots going on by the time you arrive. So just to end up, because I'm slightly over time, National Park City, incredible new story. I joined a year and a half ago, really seduced by this story, this new way of seeing the city. And I really feel that this could be a fantastic news story for people, nature, and cities in the Netherlands as well. I'm sure you're all aware that the Netherlands is such a heavily engineered natural environment. If any country, if any group of cities can take the concept of National Park City to re-engineer new futures with deep connection with nature, it has to be the Dutch, and it has to be here in Rotterdam. So I'm really excited to see what you do with it. You can join us in community at nationalparkcity.org. I believe there is a Rotterdam National Park City space. I'd love to see a Dutch language activity taking place here as well. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a call for proposals from DemocracyNext. If Rotterdam wishes to put in a call for a proposal, I'm sure it would be really welcome. So I'd sign up for their newsletter at demnext.org, and you'll be able to keep in touch with when that call for proposals come out. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how Rotterdam becomes greener, healthier, and wilder. And me and Navdeep will be following along. And yeah, do keep in touch. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And do ask me anything as well.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your inspiring narrative, what it is, and inspiring us in Rotterdam as well. Take a seat. There are a couple of people who I would like to ask to the stage to join us for a brief reflection. They are known today as the Atelier Meesters, the Workshop Masters. Workshop Master to a National Park Rotterdam, Bernadette Jansen. Please welcome to the stage. Ateliermeester from Building Crisis to Housing Crisis, Sanne van Manen. Workshop Master Infrastructure of Influence, Robert de Vrieze. En Ateliermeester Time for New Order, Paul Gerritsen. Paul, how do you listen to this inspiring narrative? Rotterdam, London becoming national park cities, and how should Rotterdam become greener, healthier, and wilder with an attempt like this one?
Yeah, good question. It's super inspiring. Thank you very much for your talk. We've had an eye on this concept already for quite some time, actually. We've made an urban nature map of Rotterdam. First try, at least. There are a couple of them actually floating around. So I think it's super inspiring that this concept can be used. And I think what's interesting is, of course, the question whether we need new concepts, new ways of working, or whether we can use old ways of thinking and apply it completely differently. And by that, changing everything. Mm-hmm. So I think the latter is, of course, what you do, and I think that's very inspiring.
Mark, what is it? Is it a narrative? Is it a story? Is it city marketing? Is it a complete new way of working? Yeah. What is it? What have we?
It's definitely a story. I mean, I think we could go into. I mentioned Ella Saltmarsh, who talks about this. You were trapped in these wrong stories, and John Alexander talks about it as well. And because how we organise society, we come up with stories about what's important and how decisions are made and how we relate to each other. And the current story we're stuck in is having pretty significant repercussions on our ability to continue living that story. So if we're going to really fix things, we need to move to a new story, and that requires imagination, and it requires a shared story that everyone can see.
It's solving the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and our crisis of imagination.
Absolutely.
That we are in at
Let's
the
do
moment.
it all at once, absolutely.
Yeah. Bernadette Jansen, how did you listen to Mark's talk?
It's really inspiring, and it's a very, very lovable and happy story. And we need that. We need that a lot. So my workshop was about National Park Rotterdam. Mm-hmm. And after 1.5 hour working in reimagining Rotterdam as a national park, we had 120 happy people. So it works.
Yeah. Okay, and I noticed my inner cynic starting to wake up at a certain moment as well when Mark was talking about this is a story. Okay, people. This is a story that might be useful for cities who are sort of encountering an identity crisis. I'm not sure how you put it, Mark, but post-industrial cities wanting to try something new. How do you make sure that it is actually something serious? So for Mark, this question is for Bernadette, for you as well.
Well, when you look at all the problems we have and the changes we have to make, then nature and green nearby is a very, actually a very easy way to start making changes.
No, I get the potential, but how do you make sure that that policy-wise stuff actually happens? Mark, what's your take on this? Because
I guess I think that common story around nature is something that everyone can recognise, regardless of how wealthy, how they've been brought up. We all have that fundamental nature reconnection. So I think being able to go back to that starting point is really powerful. I think the inner cynic is in me all the time as well. I mean, I think we're faced with such huge issues around the climate biodiversity crisis and so on. But I think the fact the only option we have is to move forward with joy and hope. I mean, this needs to be a joyful insurgency. It needs to be a way that we really embrace these new stories, because what is the alternative? We just continue on as we are? We know that isn't possible.
Sanna, you've been discussing a number of crises, building crisis, housing crisis, the biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, and yet we have to go on filled with joy and hope. Have we done so today? And what's your take-home message, your key learnings after this Stadmakerscongres?
So big questions. I think there's hope, yes, and maybe in this story as well, because we still tend to think of value in money. So if we take that maybe shallow path, but it's still very important in our society, then in nature there's a lot of value for the society. So it's if we look at we talked about it before, but for example, there's a connection between, I don't know if I pronounce it right, but obesitas, I don't know what the English. And your environment that costs already 80 billion euros for the Netherlands per year. So it's very simple. If we find a different way of doing development and we bring in these kind of aspects, then nature is, we want it all because it actually gives us a lot of value. So in that sense, it's a win-win.
Yeah, my inner cynic appears again when people start talking about a win-win. For who does this hurt, Mark? Who is against this in London, the national park city?
Who could be against a national park city? That's not possible.
Where does it hurt?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. The health and well-being. When you have that nature reconnection, if that can reduce the cost and impact on the health service. So if we want to look at it through a financial lens, it's been able to kind of realize some of those health and well-being benefits within society are really necessary and hugely compelling. So maybe win-win is a stretch too far, but these things are really deeply interconnected. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Robert?
The inner cynic is still there. We'll see.
My inner cynic doesn't have enough for at the 3 minutes. So, Robert, how did you? Do you want to be a ranger?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, you didn't yet receive a button, right?
I think I already was one when I sort of entered the green connection illegally when it was just starting. So, but I really like the narrative because we desperately need a new narrative to sort of push out the old one because it's in our way, and it sort of resonates with the workshop we had on infrastructure of influence. There was the Delfshaven Cooperative with the Welfare Coalition. And that sort of stuck to me with the metaphor of nature, because they developed the metaphor of the mycelium as a sort of a connecting underground people with all these different initiatives, with all these different plans, which sort of grow into a healthy ecosystem. And right now we are doing, for instance, the welfare through a tender. We do it with a commercial welfare company, which is sort of in the quote 500. So there's all kinds of nourishments and money flowing out of this neighborhood while it should be there because it's much more being done, much more with more impact and much more depth and reach. So I really like this narrative of the national park because it can also do something with how we move in this national park.
Okay. We're at the end of this City Makers Summit. Will you be back next year? Middle of November, somewhere like that?
Yeah,
You'll be there?
Probably, of course.
Yeah?
Of course.
I hope you will all be there. Mark, I'm not sure you will be there.
I would love to come back.
Okay.
Maybe not as guest critic next time. Though.
See you again next year. I thank you all very much for attending this year's Stadmakerscongres. It was a joy being here, having this conversation, seeing all these conversations take place. Thank you for being here as ateliermeester, and thank you as our guest urban critic, Mark Cridge. See you next year and see you at the bar in a couple of minutes downstairs.